Good afternoon. It's Allison. Just doing a little bit of an ad hoc live stream. And so, a couple of times a week, probably, if not more, I get unsolicited emails about this woman, Sabrina Wallace, who is this psi energy person online. And her focus is sort of on biofield stuff and sensor technology and telecom things. And, in a sense, it's similar to some of the stuff that I work on and that Steffers has worked on for a long time. But I wanted to sort of take, because people ask me, or they'll send things to me unsolicited and ask about it. And I've hesitated in responding because I just prefer, it's not always so helpful, but I think at this point, like, I want to sort of clarify my thinking, at least at the present time. So I've been doing a lot of research lately around what I believe is like a new technology around computing and water, like linking together structured water and water memory and biohybrid design and sort of the complexity theory and crypto and primary water and a lot of things that other people have researched for a long time, but I'm just sort of putting it together with what I understand about complexity and now fascia and microfluidics. And so I have this big map that I'm putting together, and it's linked to Dallas, and it's linked to a lot of things going into mythology and archetypal stories. And I guess what I'm like, so we did, we're up to part 7 of our Arkansas trip, and we're not even anywhere close to Arkansas. We haven't even gotten out of Colorado yet. And we had someone comment on, Jason posted one of the talks to his channel, and someone's like, I'm not going to spend 3 hours on this. This is ridiculous. And I'm like, okay, you're not our audience. Like, I'm not here. This is not my business. I'm not making money off of this. So if it's not, you're not into that, that's fine. But I don't know why you show up and say, I'm not going to spend time on this because I think it's stupid. I mean, just keep it to yourself and just unsubscribe from the channel, which we helped them along and blocked them from both channels so they don't have to be bothered with us anymore. But for the most part, the messages for the stuff that I'm working at are very fringe and very much outside of the norm. And it's going to be that way. And I'm okay with it being that way. Because I understand that what's happening within the digital sphere, and again, I know I'm participating because this is on stupid YouTube, but I know that I'm way over in a corner and not many people are paying attention, is that it's straight up psychological warfare. So if something is being put in your field of view over and over and over again, it's because the feed wants it there. And I have a feeling that most of you guys, since there's only like 10 viewers at the moment, like, I'm not being put into people's feeds. I'm over here, and they're probably keeping an eye on me for, social computation purposes, but I'm not being shoved in people's faces. And so, and some people are, right? This person, Sabrina Wallace, clearly is. And so as I was working on my map today, I've been revisiting my ideas about the global brain and Oliver Reiser and the World Sensorium, and realizing that I don't think that the brain is the right metaphor, and that Leo had shared a wonderful clip with me about fascia and the electrical communication signaling of the body and microfluidics. And I think that is much more in line with Web3 and distributed intelligence and distributed communication systems. And so I've been looking a lot into fascia, and then again, how it overlaps. It overlaps with eurythmy and intentional movement and kinesthesiology and gestural coding. And there's lots of aspects where, like, biophotons and aura and electrical communication fit in, and they fit in with Michael Levin as well. And this cell to cell based communication, that's very different from spine, brain, neuron communication. That is much more centralized. So I think that the fascia, at least conceptually, is something that I'm really interested in looking at more closely, relating to Web3 tokenization and coordination of this, ant computer system, maybe the psychic ant computer system. And so last night I was like messaging with Steffers, and I was like, hey, I think that probably the fascia in its electrical communication signaling is probably meshes up with the Wood Wide Web, right? In terms of the fungal mycorrhizal networks. And I had forgotten that she actually wrote a wonderful piece in February of 2021. There was doubt, and and so, and her piece was called "The Scent of Fear," and it was about pheromones and signaling. And so, looking at what we understand as contagion, but as like energetic transmission, and how that works in different kinds of organisms, and that the idea of an alarm signal is something that is in the forest, right? And so when certain trees are being attacked by insects or other things, there are signals that happen through the roots and then the mycorrhizal, like the partner, all the little organisms in the soil that allow that communication to happen like very quickly. And I think that that's sort of equivalent to the fascia. And so it's sending this alarm signal, and then it puts those objects like receiving the alarm signal under a certain amount of stress because they're like, oh my gosh, there's something terrible happening. And so I think that once we understand that what we're living through and what we will continue to live through in the foreseeable future is psychological warfare. This is cognitive warfare on consciousness and the spirit. And I've kind of, I had this in my, like my little photo that I put on this. It's Itzhak Bentov's book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, and it's about consciousness. And this is from like 1975, I think. This guy died in a plane crash in 79. But it's very much about the nature of consciousness and what is reality and physics. And, he evidently he was like involved in the creation of Israel's early rocket program, and he has all of these cardio patents and things. I mean, he was a self-taught person, but he was looking at reality from the standpoint of physics. And so increasingly, the more you look into it, the more you're like, okay, well, so maybe the material reality is less important than what's behind the material reality. And so I think if the feed can keep your consciousness in fear of the material reality, that it can poke you around on the game board much more easily. And so I guess what I wanted to say about like Sabrina Wallace's content and the psi energy, I only saw like one of her pieces. But I think if you're someone who watches that, you realize it's kind of along the lines of the Yuval Harari, right? Like, you're a hackable animal. We should all be afraid. There's all these terrible things happening. And it's in fact, the most recent person who sent it, they were like, oh, it's terrible. I saw it. She seems to know her stuff. It's terrible. And I said, that's the point. The point is the alarm signal, because the alarm signal, I think also, it's a signal that's trackable within the system. So we have to understand not only is it a war on consciousness or struggle for consciousness or engagement around consciousness, maybe war is too strong a term, but the forces are about controlling consciousness and controlling your attention in the tokenized attention economy, is that if they can keep you under stress, like, you're more movable, right? And you're reactive to that. And so that's sort of how I'm feeling about it. And I'm going to link to Steffer's article. It's called like The Scent of Fear. And it's a communication for the simulation modeling system, right? So the more they can drip, put fear things in, and then it spreads. And so there's some people who really love scary things, right? Like, there's some people who love scary roller coasters, and there's some people who love horror movies, and neither of those are me. Like, I'm not that. And so I would say, like, early on when I was on Twitter, and I was probably more entrained to the feed, and that's something, again, Bentov talks a lot about, is entrainment and sympathetic vibration. I was putting out things that scared me. And I wasn't putting them out specifically intending to scare people, but I think that that's probably what was happening. So I was transmitting a pheromone of fear because I was afraid, and because I didn't have some of these other ideas that, like, oh, maybe it's not all just material reality going on. And even in Steffer's article, she reflects that, like, initially she was transmitting more fear. And so I think if you just stop and pause and you're like, why is this person followed by thousands of people on TikTok? Why are they getting thousands of shares and thousands of likes? And why are 4 people a week sending me this thing saying, have you seen Sabrina Wallace? Well, I would just point out that like Steffers and I were talking about the Internet of Bio-Nano things in 2021, right? And Ian Akildes and how it fit in with cybernetics and impact finance. And then eventually I moved into the ant computer and, Steffers, we were talking about stigmergy and these pheromones. And so this is nothing new to us. Now, we didn't get uplifted because even though I think I was like transmitting a certain amount of fear, I wasn't like deep fear, right? And so we were not going to be important to be uplifted in that moment. Now it's a time that we like the curtain is drawn back. And so it's okay to make people really afraid of all of this stuff. And so I think like if you just pause and say, why is this in my feed? Right? Why is this getting uplifted? If it was really subversive, you wouldn't find out about it. Right? And I would say if people are sending me things, is it simply that like I hear some things like biofield or aura that relate to what you're doing, so maybe you'll like this. But my question is there a new concept behind it? Like, is there something new for me to learn from this content that isn't simply inflammatory and an alarm pheromone? Because I like new ideas. Like that's the thing. I actually appreciate new concepts that I can incorporate. So lately in this map that I've been working on, I've been revisiting work. A lot of it was done by Steffers and a friend of mine, Gino, and looking at primary water and volcanic activity in British Columbia and how I'm seeing that might interface with the history of technocracy and memory-based water computing and universal basic income, right? So there are these certain ideas that are maybe not totally novel, but put together in new ways that make me think. So just like sharing a link to a video, expecting that I'm going to watch it without you saying like, I think that this is something that adds to or contributes how you think about things. Like I'm just probably not going to watch it if there's not something specific that's additive. Because I'm dealing with, like, I've got a very full plate of dealing with my own concepts. Now, if there's something that's coming out that's like really undermines something, I'm like, I would be appreciative of people telling me like, hey, you're saying this, but this seems to indicate something to the contrary. And, and then I would look at that. But simply doing a swarm behavior, because this is a swarm behavior, like, oh, someone I trust sent me this link from this woman who has very inflammatory, scary content, and then I'm sending it to you. And I would say that's memetics and that's a mind virus. Like that's an example of how the feed works in terms of agent-based modeling, simulation, and fear. And if we can get past the physicality part into the consciousness part, I think we can maybe be less activated by the fear part and then a little bit more stepping back to look at the concepts. So, if someone has something from Sabrina Wallace that they would like to share that's a specific concept beyond simply frequency modulation in biology and biophysics, like I would be open to that specific idea. But if it's just fear porn, not interested in that, because I think that doesn't actually move the needle for me. And yeah, so I guess like just to reiterate, like Steffers has this wonderful article from March of 2021 on the engineered nanoparticle, Confessions of an Engineered Nanoparticle. It's very clever. She's very, very good with how she uses her language, and she's a much better storyteller than I am. And so I would go back and say like, that one actually did get a fair bit of traction. But to me, that's a gentle understanding and teaching of the concept as opposed to like a frequency-based shock. And I will just say that, like, it came to my attention, one of the people, and I'm sure like there's probably thousands of people who are out there sharing this psi energy stuff. And, my sense is based on my personal experience that the conversion story, like the insider who's going to give you the scoop because they were doing the thing and then they realized that thing wasn't good. And there are many of those insider turnaround whistleblower conversion stories. I think they just generally don't turn out well. So I could be wrong, and maybe I'm wrong about her, but it's an archetypal story of the insider turned around to be the truth teller. And I don't think that that's an archetype that we want to necessarily put all our trust behind. So one of the people that was advancing her ideas, and they're like, oh, nobody's talking about this. Nobody's talking about this but her. Well, no, Steffers was talking about it. And I was talking about it. We were talking about, but we were uplifted by the feed because it wasn't our time and it wasn't helpful to the feed to create a mind virus to scare everybody. And I'm trying really hard to sort of go step back and really look at concepts and not to do the fear porn, because I think the fear porn and the alarm stuff isn't helpful. But one of the people who had uplifted her work and said, oh, she's the only one talking about this, is this guy, Xavier Hawke. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to wrap up this map about water and computing and consciousness and, archetypes and digital Web3 stuff. And then I was like, this gets thrown. And I'm like, I don't know where to put this guy, Xavier Hawke. So he was evidently, I'd never heard of him before, but a colleague, at least he says he was a colleague of Bernard Lietaer. And his family, he's some sort of archaeo astronomy, wilderness guy, entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur. He's going to set you up with like a Bitcoin smart city, but it's going to be the eco kind. It's going to be the good freedom cell kind. And he's based in South Florida where all the crypto stuff is. And he's also evidently on the board of the Waldorf School in Palm Beach, which is quite telling given Galila Benartzi and Ari Ben David and his connection to Waldorf. So I would say going back to the fascia and the electrical communication of the body, that's pretty interesting. But like, yeah, he was uplifting that and uplifting RFK Jr. and all of these things. So I would just say, like, I'm not here to tell anybody how to spend their attention tokens. You can spend your attention tokens however you want to spend them. But I would point out, if you're going to spend your attention tokens scaring yourself with Sabrina Wallace's Site Energy channel, take a moment and read Steffers' article on Ascent of Fear and the alarm pheromones, and understand like how that works in the wood wide web and through the forest, and how it may be working in terms of like consciousness, engagement around consciousness and fear. And then be mindful of what you engage with and be mindful about what you sample. And if you're watching something and you're not getting anything out of it other than to be afraid, like once you've got the basic concept that we are water-based liquid crystalline beings that are affected by frequencies, and yes, there are self-assembling nanoparticles that are impacting how our biology works or interfaces with Web3. And those are all sort of basic understandings where I'm at. Like we kind of got that generally dialed in. Do we need to know about every single biosensor? Is there something about like a new biosensor or a new frequency that tells us something about broadly how the system works? Or is it simply like just checking out another box of another thing to be afraid about? So anyway, that is my 2 cents. And, I understand that the tendency is for people to transmit information, right? Like, the thing that I thought was really wonderful about the Bentov book, and I haven't made it all the way through, but I find it really fascinating, is in the beginning, he talks about humans being, we're information organizers. So we live, we experience the material reality, we have relationships with other humans, with the natural world, we try to make sense about what we're encountering, and then that sense making is kind of embodied, like held in our biology, I think, like in the fascia. That's what I'm looking at now. And then interfacing with the universal mind, if you want to call it the Akashic records or what have you, but there is an energetic frequency that, the creative force of the universe pops us up. We show up with our soul and we do our thing and we organize our part of the world, and then we send it back. And then eventually our body, fails us. And then we go back into the system, right? And that ultimately our job of organizing information based on what our personal lived experience is contributes to the greater good. And I think my sense is now that there's some planned attempt to put up an intercept layer, right? Just like the intercept, Edward Snowden, but with self-assembling graphene and electrical particles like in between. So where structured water may interface with the DNA and do this sort of quantum computation, that there's like a layer in there that's going to pull the information off, not necessarily disappear it, but either use it for its own pattern seeking information purposes, or perhaps to use electromagnetic frequencies to change things, to direct things in some way. So it's a lot of big things to think about. But I would suggest let's think about the big ideas and the concepts with the understanding that material reality isn't all there is, and then just consume the content online with that in mind. And just my 2 cents, the a big insider whistleblower stories. I don't know. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical of how all that works out. So anyway, thanks for joining in. And again, for people who have sent me stuff from her, it's nothing personal. I just felt like it was finally time to say something, because again, everybody has a right to consume what they consume. But the things that are spreading for a reason. And it's about constructed group consciousness. And then just be very thoughtful about what you put into your consciousness and where you spend that focus. Because I think that if what you're doing is simply mirroring what the feed is putting in front of you, then you are merely amplifying that frequency. And if what they're saying is that we should be mindful of frequencies, but what we're doing is spending time on TikTok and amplifying the frequency, then it's kind of pointless. So anyway, all right. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.